Good morning, parish orphans and retrogrades. Today, I bring to you Mr. Cameron O'Hearn, the director of the exciting new documentary about the traditional Latin Mass called Mass of the Ages. And I have a really good interview set up with him. We both promised each other we'd do a good interview right now. So, everyone, I present to you without further ado, Mr. Cameron O'Hearn. Thanks for joining me today, bud.
Hey, thanks for having me, Timothy. Am I a retrograde just for being on your show, or how do I get into that club?
The status is it's not quite automatic once one comes on here. If you come
Okay.
on here and we butt heads too much, doesn't happen that often, then we withhold the status for a 6-month waiting period. But yeah, I was looking at your website. I watched your excellent film, and you're a fan of the show. We're mutual fans of each other, so I'll grant you that rubber stamp right now. Automatic retrograde. Boom.
Thank you.
That's how
Glad
we
to be here.
Yeah, yeah, man. No, I'm really glad to have you, and I was excited because I was going to reach out to you, and I think your people ended up reaching out to Rules for Retrogrades. I was coming for you if you didn't come for me. The point is, this thing has turned into a phenomenon, man, and I see why. I watched it last week, late in this week. Actually, I didn't see it when it first broke, and I'd been excited to. And the hubbub on Catholic Twitter and on Catholic social media promised something great. And when I watched the film, it absolutely delivered. So you've got to be sort of walking on air a little bit.
I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone because for a long time it was just me and my wife who watched the film, just knew what it was. And then, of course, opening it up to the team and getting their feedback. And then we opened it up to 100 private screeners, but 100 people is a lot different from, I think we have about 500,000 people who've seen it so far as of the date of this recording. And it does feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. I mean, I knew a lot of people would see it, but I wasn't expecting this overwhelming positive feedback because you're dealing with something very divisive, and it's hard. You say one thing about it and you have 5 people who disagree with you. And you can never win in this argument on the traditional Latin Mass. But wow, the Holy Spirit just guided it to what it was supposed to be. It's a very inspiring and I would say uniting documentary. It really just sets the stage for why we love the traditional Latin Mass. And I think even if people only saw episode 1, I think it would have done a good job of inviting really it's made for the faithful Catholics who sit in the pews at the Novus Ordo Mass, who aren't already, watching Rules for Retrogrades. Maybe they are, maybe they feel like a parish orphan, like a lot of your audience is, but they haven't yet had the push to join a traditional Latin Mass community. And I think we largely hit the target on that. There's negative feedback, but I just think it's a rousing success because of all the positive good fruits that have come from it. The peace, you should have seen the comments when we were live on our live stream. I actually had someone on standby just in case there was some tratty Cathys who wanted to be really mean and divide people. But it was just, someone would have a question and 3 people would answer it very charitably. I was like, wow, this is the audience we've built.
Right.
People who love the traditional Latin Mass. And we're not, yes, we can get into Vatican II. We can get into Paul VI and Pope Francis. And I like talking about all that stuff. But the fundamental thing is we love this treasure and we just want it to be preserved.
Right. See, that's why you're a retrograde, man.
Okay.
Yeah, I learned 3 years ago doing this, 3 years ago, almost to the month, that moderators are 100% indispensable for mean-spirited whoever's, right? From the left, or I wouldn't call it the right, just from the fringes of whatever side of whatever theater of war happens to be disagreeing with you. So That's absolutely right. But the film is so positive, and it's kind of a gay term to say it's a differential of perspectives. It's a nice panoply of perspectives, but it really is. And that keeps it the way the left bats this around. I usually laugh at it, but the diversity and inclusiveness of it, particularly the way you opened with the widow, really keeps it not that that's upbeat, but it keeps the emphasis upbeat. And I really commend you for that. Can I ask you, because this is what I kept thinking, and I think everyone did when they first sat down to watch, was the timing of the release providential, immediately following Traditionis Custodes' promulgation, or was it planned? Human planned.
Yeah, well, we've been working on the film, if you count our strategic meetings at the very outset and our planning upfront, for 2 years.
Right.
And we announced our release date a couple months before August, I believe. So I didn't have any idea. None of us had any idea that Traditionis Custodes was going to come out.
Right.
And so it's purely providential. It came out almost exactly a month after Motu Proprio. And like, if that Motu Proprio dropped 2 years ago, this is exactly the kind of documentary I'd want to make, because it implicitly challenges the assumptions in that document, and without really trying too hard. It's just the way we've packaged this story. It shows not angry, old, divisive people, but just young families,
right, or angry, young, divisive people. But those are a lot of the people that have been going to Latin Mass for 6 months. It's people that love the Latin Mass, which
and
is
just normal priests too. Just like,
yes,
yeah, these are the types of, yes, you find wacky people. I think if wacky people are going to go to the mass, they're going to go to the Latin Mass because it's just a little wackier. But it doesn't engender this kind of divisive mentality, which is the fundamental, I think, flaw with the Motu Proprio. It's not the Mass that's engendering this divisiveness. It's something else. And it's interesting. We had this documentary just like ready to go a month after that Motu Proprio. So certainly it was providential. In
your answer, I read providential. Yeah, 100% then. Now, you mentioned some attacks. Let me read you. Get ready to cringe. You all right? America Mag. Here's a review. : Mass of the Ages uses classic propaganda tactics to make the case for the Latin Mass. Now, I don't know how classic propaganda, which these people obviously don't understand statecraft or tradecraft at all, ab initio, they don't understand it from the jump. How could saying that you love a beautiful form of liturgy ever be anything other than an aesthetics piece? They critique, these America magazine writers, together with the editor, the fact that you have an aesthetic love for it. Let me read you a piece of the claptrap. You're right. Ready for the coffee clutch for the slack-jawed left cats? Ready. Yeah. Here, just earmuffs if you can't hear it, but I want to read it for the audience. The nuptial bond breaking would end. No one would be lonely. To its credit, the rather briskly paced argument for the Latin Mass, directed by Cameron O'Hearn, acknowledges the thing that fuels the burning desire among many to see a return to the traditional Mass: aesthetics, right? As if that's a dumb thing. The incense and the mystery. Among those who weigh in on the cosmetic prose of the pre-Vatican II rite is Jimmy Fallon, who remembers being an altar boy, as do several celebrities who appear in this film. None of them, unlike this critic, in parentheses, are old enough to remember serving as an altar boy in Latin. It is pure nostalgia, though Mr. O'Hearn wants to make it something more. Yeah. I mean,
did a woman write that?
What do you say to that? Is this pure nostalgia? This is pure retardation.
I read that interview or that review. We actually sent out pre-release copies. We said, okay, all press is good press. I read it before we even released the film. So I was like, did I make a big mistake? But on the other hand, I couldn't understand half of that review. Like, it's so, I don't know, it's so grandiose in its verbiage. I just I'm trying to understand what he means. I think what he means is what he thinks I think is that if we just very simply, I think later in that article it says, you know, if the priest turns his back to the people, everything will be okay, which is, I think that would be someone coming to the documentary with preconceived ideas about what it's trying to say without actually listening to what is being said. Because the case is made that the way we worship impacts what we believe. And so it's not just about aesthetics. It's not just about how it looks or just the externals, but those things are critically important. The reason that Christine takes her kids, the widow takes her kids to the traditional Latin Mass and finds a sturdy foundation in it is because it's unchanging. It's handed down to her from ages past. It's the saint-making machine of the church. And it is a perfect display of love and adoration for Jesus in the Eucharist. So we love the traditional Latin Mass for the same reason we love the Catholic faith. And I think they're almost identical. And so yeah, I think that article was just taking some cheap shots, and I wish he would just watch it again and be a little more open-minded.
Well, one of your FAQs on the website speaks to what is an ostensible concern of whoever wrote this piece of claptrap, i.e., I don't think he understands the difference between necessary and sufficient conditions, right? For the possibility of something. A necessary condition is needed. Sufficient conditions are satis, they're enough to fulfill the eventuation of some later event X, right? So what you're saying and what I'm saying whenever I talk about Latin Mass here on Rules for Retrogrades, which is not infrequently, it's not all we do. You can go to other outfits for that where that's all they do, but it's a big part of what we do is the invitation to the TLM whenever and wherever you can licitly get it, is like a necessary condition for being a good Catholic that you have to be into, to just use a common street term, you have to be into what you have to be all about what's happening at the altar, the bloodless sacrifice at the altar. You have to be engaged. Now, being into it, being engrossed in it is not a sufficient condition for being a good Catholic. And you address this in your FAQ, which should satisfy Mr. America Mag critic of yours, right? You're like, look, it's a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition, that a serious Catholic, a good Catholic, is into the bloodless sacrifice at the altar at the Mass. And this can happen at the Novus Ordo, but it's far less likely to happen. These are my words, not yours now, but I think we agree. And it's far more difficult to be into it, like phenomenologically, to be into what's happening at the altar, you know, the liturgy of the Eucharist. So but you say specifically in your FAQ on your own site that this by itself is not a sufficient condition. That's not a direct quote, but you say it doesn't automatically make anyone who's ever been to the Latin Mass or who has even acquired the habit of going to Latin Mass a good person or even a good Catholic. It's one of the checks. You check the box for, okay, liturgically, if you go and you get it and you get into it, there is a high correlation of at least being able to check your liturgical devotion box in the many series of boxes that it requires to be a good Catholic. Is that a fair encapsulation of how you would respond to this?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think all too often the dialogue that's been in the church and in the church hierarchy in regards to the traditional Latin Mass has centered on validity and Vatican II. And it's like, that is not even, that's not even our point. We're not saying it's invalid. We're not saying, most of us aren't saying Vatican II bad, I would say. We're just looking at this time period of like something, and a lot of people don't know what happened, but something, I'm trying to use the right word. I want to say demonic, but I don't want to go that far, but something disastrous happened to the new mass. And that's definitely what we're going to unpack in episode 2, because a lot of people think that, Vatican II and the new mass kind of are the same, or that the new mass kind of rolled off the shelf at Vatican II. But what they don't see is this time period where this concilium, this committee put together by Paul VI, was implementing Sacrosanctum Concilium, the document on the liturgy, and they just went crazy. They went way too far. And now we have this mass. Yes, it's valid, but we got to get away from this valid, invalid discussion, because that's not helpful.
Right.
It's more about, because it's a disciplinary matter and it's to do with church custom, we're talking about effectiveness. Okay, we did this thing disciplinarily. Now we can ask the question, 60 years out, was it effective? And I think a faithful Catholic can say, no, just statistically, it's not effective. And personally, when I go to the new mass, I don't see my Catholic faith on full display. But when I go to the traditional Latin mass, I see all the doctrines, and I see like a mass that's not going to offend the piety of my kids.
Right.
And so I think that's an important just detour we have to take in the conversations. Like Word on Fire just released this, beautiful, stunning publication on Vatican II. And that's great. That's a thing. But it's almost like they're saying that's where the battle's being fought. When you have all this critique and, Pope Francis's limitations of the traditional Latin Mass, that we're talking about Vatican II, but we're not. I'm glad Word on Fire is doing that, but that's not where the debate is. That's a different conversation altogether. You have had some great shows that I want to commend you on Vatican II and on Traditionis Custodes, and has got me really thinking through some of these things too.
Oh, thanks, brother. I really appreciate that. Genuinely. Has Word on Fire touched your documentary at all with one, critical word? Have they spilled any ink on this?
No. We have some connections in the walls of Word on Fire, but they haven't reviewed it to my knowledge, and they haven't touched it to any degree, like you said. I think it might be, there's people we feature in the documentary, just, Dr. Taylor Marshall, who I appreciate. Dr. Marshall, I think he had a great quote in the documentary about, the setting, the diamond, like that. That's a really good quote. He had some other good things to say. There's some people really disagree with Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, but I'm a filmmaker. Okay. I'm not, I just want who's going to say the thing the best and the most persuasively. And I want to tell a story. So I'm not concerned so much with the optics of it. Now, if you've noticed, our branding hasn't been like radical traditionalist branding. It's been like, hey, look at this beautiful thing. I invite you to the traditional Latin Mass. So what I would presume to say is that these Word on Fire or others probably don't want to unpack it, because they're associating themselves with these kinds of individuals, which is sad. I think just take the film on its merits, look at it. If you want to argue the case of the film, let's do that. But base it on the argument of the film, not what any individual has said at any other time. So I think it's a shallow reason, but who knows? That's just my speculation.
Yeah, to be fair, we're just being objective here. There is a titular head to Word on Fire. It's Robert Bishop Barron, and I don't think he knows how to say the Latin Mass. I don't think he has any interest in saying the Latin Mass. So why would they take an interest in it? Well, you presented lots of good reasons in that first episode for why perhaps they should. But I want to go back to something. I was unsure whether to touch it, just whether there'd be enough time flat out in the interview. But you broached the topic, I'd say about 3 minutes ago when you're speaking. Sacrosanctum Concilium is a series of guidelines there are at least, what I do on Rules for Retrogrades is I trace out at least 3 degrees of separation between what we see if we get stuck at a Novus Ordo on Sunday at 99% of the parishes, monkeys music and some goofball cleric that's giving some goofball homiletics and who clearly is rushing past the liturgy of the Eucharist with weird consecration stance, facing the people and all the rest. There's 3 degrees of separation, okay? Because first there's Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is really what the Syllabus of Errors, Paul VI, the rest of the 2,000-year-old magisterium calls us to revere, is an ecumenical council's document. It doesn't matter whether or not there's dogma in that document, because there is none in Sacrosanctum Concilium, but it's really, as Raymond Arroyo was pointing out 6 weeks ago, right after Traditionis Custodes, it's really good. Sacrosanctum Concilium, the first degree, now that's not good. The first degree of separation represents the typical organic, mild, non-abrupt change, just, legit liturgical development that would have left the TLM quite intact. I mean, it would basically be just an organically modified TLM. The way I read Sacrosanctum Concilium. Is it vague? Yes, because as you point out on your website, it's a guideline. But then you get to 4.5 years later with the work product of the Concilium, number 2, known as the Missal of Paul VI. And this is quite a bit worse. You get into all the, the architecture of Bunini. You get into Concilium versus Communio, Ratzinger expressing concern during and after, the release of the Missal. And so it does get appreciably worse from degree of separation 1, Sacrosanctum Concilium, to degree of separation 2, the Missal of Paul VI, right? It gets appreciably way, way worse, way less organic change, since Cardinal Burke has kind of validated that distinction, way more abrupt, whatever. Then you get to degree of separation 3, about 4.5, 5 years after that, in the middle 70s, when they started introducing all of this vile filth on top of the Missal of Paul VI that somehow got ubiquitized, universalized. We see it most masses, the goofy hand-holding and the stupid cantors doing this, the hymns instead of chant, all that. That was really 3 degrees of separation away from Sacrosanctum Concilium. So I like how on your website you reference a radical agenda that was implemented after the council. And I would say there are probably a lot of wicked prelates at the council that knew before and during the council that it would be implemented. So it's sort of a prefigurement. But the radical agenda was actually implemented later. Would you agree with this characterization that really vindicates the involvement that the council itself had with the liturgy, at least the documentary evidence?
Yeah, I agree with your response to Pope Francis to say, yes, let's embrace Vatican II. And by that, we mean Sacrosanctum Concilium. Let's start having the new masses patterned after Sacrosanctum Concilium. Because when you actually read the document, yes, there are ambiguous phrases that, were put in there on purpose. But as a whole, if you just read it as a whole, it's like, okay, this is why over 2,000 bishops voted for it, including Archbishop Lefebvre, and only 6 or so dissented, because it's pretty much a conservative, rewrite or reassembly of the traditional Latin Mass, and that's been done, in centuries past. So, and you go to a traditional Latin Mass and you see that there are things that could use changes, but when I say the word change, man, that is a very loaded term, because what I'm not saying, what you're not saying, is like, let's start, doing table altars or like changing the music. Or so we have a mess in front of us. We have, like you said, Sacrosanctum Concilium happened. then the concilium put together the new mass and just took a bunch of liberties because Bunini kind of orchestrated that. And he didn't get everything done he wanted to, but he certainly got a lot done. You just look at the vast amount of prayers that were rewritten and how many things were removed. And then you have this third degree, which boggles my mind, because why, after the pontificate of Benedict XVI, John Paul II, who opened up, celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, and people in positions of power like Cardinal Sarah, do we still have 99.9% of masses are facing the people? It's entirely out loud. It's casual. Communion is given on the hand. I mean, this is just what the average Catholic family has to wrestle with. It's like, where am I going to Mass? And this third degree of separation, I think the documentary is really shining a light on this second degree. So episode 2, we're getting into what happened with the concilium, all the changes that were made, because I think that's going to do a lot of good. We're going to, give more light than dark. We're going to not raise more questions than we answer. We just want to give people the facts. We want to tell the story, simple, charitable. Here you go. Here's actually what happened. And it's going to shock a lot of people. And then the conversation is going to shift away from Vatican II this, Vatican II that, to, oh man, we need to pray and strive, firstly, to remove that third degree of separation. Let's get priests to actually offer the new Mass in a sacred, reverent way. Let's bring back all the things we want, like in Sacrosanctum Concilium. And then we need to, as Catholic families, we need to take shelter in good Catholic parishes, traditional parishes, while the church figures out phase 2, because we can't do anything about the rubrics. We can't change any of that. And we can't wait for the church to change that.
Right.
So that's why I go to traditional Latin Mass, is because I can't wait on the church. I see all these degrees of separation. I'm like, well, the church has to figure it out. I don't have a pedigree as a bishop, and I just want to go to a Mass that doesn't offend the piety of my children. So I do agree with your distinctions there. Certainly.
So when does episode 2 drop? This sounds really, really good.
This year there will be people who will see it, and by that I mean we have stages. So we have screenings kind of internally, then we open it up publicly, but to a limited audience. So there will be a limited audience that can see episode 2 this year. And then we'll do theater screenings in the new year, where the only place you can watch it is a double feature of episodes 1 and 2 in the theaters with a little intermission in between. And we want people to invite people to it. We want, like, you're a traditional Catholic, or like you're interested in this. This will be a period of time where we want you to invite your family and friends, priest friends, get a bishop to attend, because we really want to create this groundswell where we reframe the conversation. So episode 2 in the new year, we'll start releasing it publicly in theaters, and we'll be doing screenings across the country too.
Man, that sounds really, really good. Okay, so and if you're looking for one more addendum to that list of folks who get to pre-screen, I'd put myself forward. But let me say this: you address, I agree with everything you've said. Is the TLM better? Let me just straight up ask that, because I think it is. Now, that doesn't mean that it makes you a better Catholic. I like how you said that, but is the TLM better? Opinion? Oh, you can opine, and that doesn't violate anything that you or I have said about the inviolability of Vatican II, the semi-violability of the Concilium and the new Missal, which can be undone, unlike Vatican II. And it definitely, it steps right beyond the kinds of unspoken, secretly nodded liturgical changes in degree of separation 3. But is the TLM better?
Because the church has said that Gregorian chant is better, that Latin is better, that silence is the best way to communicate with God. That's just deep in our tradition. because the church has said no one can change the liturgy on their own authority. It's received, it's passed on. By all those reasons, it's just better because
Right.
the church has said so. Not what the church has done. Yes, valid, but validity is not enough. Validity is a very low bar, and it's a low bar on purpose because you don't want to have all these, hoops you have to jump through to make sure every single mass is valid. Validity is a minimum, and so there's a lot to say about the liturgy, and I think based on what the church has said, the traditions have said that the Latin Mass is just better, and I would say it's better because it's more effective. It's more effective at communicating who we worship on the altar, our reverence for saints, love of God, despising things of the world, our own weakness, how sin weakens us. It's just, you could go on and on for how the traditional Latin Mass is packaged to be our faith. It is our faith on full display, and that's why it's simply better. Now, of course, that doesn't mean, like you said, and I'm just going to reiterate, and it's going to sound like a broken record, you can't delineate good Catholics from bad Catholics that easily.
Right.
You do so by what they believe, and then you can get into like, well, it's interesting that you survey people who go to the traditional Latin Mass, and what do they believe about the real presence, for example. So that's how you delineate good Catholics from bad Catholics, and good priests from unholy priests.
I think when we're judging the laity, it's a two-prong test, as we say in the law. The two-prong test is, do you believe the right thing? And that's a fruits of the tree test, right? Like, well, the fruits of the Latin Mass, I think, as long as you say I think it's okay, are objectively better from the Latin Mass than the Novus Ordo. And most trads are 100% with me when I say that. Fruits of the tree, right? Better fruits in terms of episteme, what we believe, doctrine, come from the Latin Mass rather than the Novus Ordo. But then I say, but trads, here's the thing. There's a second fruit of the tree test. There's a second fruit of the tree test. And now it's applied doctrine to lived experience. And are you joyful? Are you going through your life applying what you love so much about the Latin Mass that you're always talking about and tweeting about and Facebooking about? How much does a smile, how frequently does a smile occasion your face? That's a second fruit of the tree test that we trads have got to be better at, because we do apply that first fruit of the tree test for knowledge. Now we have to go a lived experience. Well, if it is this much better, it ought to make them it ought to be a smile factory, and the homos on the left ought to love that.
Well, I don't want people like smiling at me when I'm at Mass and like turning around and
no after.
Okay, after.
Yeah,
before,
don't.
After, yeah. Or like you're both, I've seen that you're back, you both have kids, like all rolling your eyes together, and there's a little bit of camaraderie, like, hey, is this your first time here? And a little bit of chatter, in the back, just you see someone you don't know. But yeah, totally. I'm on the same page. I think I conflated those two too easily, of like good beliefs with a good person, but you're absolutely right. So you can't delineate good Catholics that easily just by where they attend.
Yeah, the former trads love, the latter they kind of neglect. But anyway, any parting shots? Sorry, it sounded like you had something.
I want to ask you a question.
Got it.
This is my show, if you would allow me.
Interview paradigmatic change. Go, do it. Yeah.
So I was thinking about your analogy about Quo Primum and Vatican I.
Gotcha.
And just to sum up very, very terribly, Vatican I is a royal flush. Quo Primum is like a pear. And that's how you delineate like the hierarchy, right?
Yeah, something like I think I said ecumenical council is a straight flush, and any ex cathedra statements are royal flush. But
okay, straight flush.
Go on. Yeah,
let's go with straight flush.
Okay.
So I was thinking about that, and I want to put a question to you. So since Quo Primum spoke in specific terms about the missal, and Vatican I speaks in general terms, question one does the specific supersede the general? So let me conflate it again with another analogy you had, which was the shopping analogy. So you got to go to the grocery store, and on one instance, your mom says get 2 things. Another instance, she says 3 things.
Right.
So, so let's say quo primum is your mom saying, don't ever buy cheese because I'm allergic to cheese.
Yeah.
And then Vatican I is your mom saying, go and get me every single dairy product from the grocery store. So the question is, okay, here's how I would see it. The specific statement was made in quo primum, and you'd have to argue that the Latin Mass could never be abrogated. It certainly can be revised. But then Vatican I gives a general statement about disciplinary infallibility. But shouldn't these things be read in tension? And to say it another way, yes, a straight flush beats a pair, but a straight flush is not played every hand. And let's say someone has, maybe Vatican I is an ace, king, queen, 10, all the same suit, but it's missing a jack. It's really close to saying what it needs to say to like play in this hand. But quo primum is that pair of jacks, is that very specific, like, yes, it's a pair, but the pair plays, because in this instance, Vatican I doesn't play. Convoluted question. I've just been thinking about that.
No, it's a good question. See, here's where I say more trads need to have studied not just law, but jurisprudence, which is almost I studied in law. This book here has like 700 canons of interpretation organized by Scalia and his friend Brian Garner. It's a thick book. It's one of the, I actually think I have his interview, or I have his signature, because he would always come to my law school because he liked University of San Diego. So reading law, the interpretation of legal texts, there are like 700 canons of interpretation, and they work for legal ecclesiastical texts too. So the question is this: when you have interjurisdictionality, like, does ace high beat a jack high? Yes, when you have the same hand, right? So, and that's kind of the equivalent of being more specific. If you have 2 similar documents of similar legal pedigree, 2 straight flushes, then you look to, is this ace high or is this 9 high? But, and there is a trick there. But the problem with talking about the Vatican I Pastora Aeternus document is it's relatively specific. It's sweeping, but it's specifically sweeping, particularly paragraphs 2, 8, and 9. So yes, there could be gloss added to it, as we say in one of the canons of interpretation here by Scalia, but the gloss has to be added by a similar hand or above.
Oh, okay.
And if the magisterium works as much as we're always boasting it does to Protestants, you don't even have a magisterium, or Muslims, how does this work? How does the interpretation of your sacred text work without a magisterium? The silliest thing about our faith is that at times we're left questioning whether or not it actually works this mechanistically. We want it to work mechanistically the way the canons of interpretation do. So it really does need, there's nothing to debate here. If we want to add gloss to Vatican I, the church, according to the way the magisterium ostensibly works, has to do it at the level of another ecumenical council or above. And to add to that, add force to that, we have all these instances, Cameron, throughout the 2,000 years of the magisterium, where we saw really, really violent, abrupt changes. First 1900 years, forget Vatican II. Violent, abrupt changes to liturgy that were done as a kind of one-off. So the second part of your question is really good. I'd love to have you back on and talk about it, but we have to run. But it's a great first question and a great second question. They deserve separate answers, and we simply don't have the time for the second one. But let's correspond at least privately about it, and maybe I'll add it to a show. The answer to Cameron's question. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good.
Okay, you're like, whatever.
What?
Why is this guy talking to me like I'm a kindergarten?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you that you should have me on your show. That's
yeah. Let's
I'm not
do
going to disagree with. I'm not going to go into it.
Cool, man. Well, okay. I want to tell everyone, please donate to the film, The Mass of Ages, Mass of the Ages, at the website, right? So go donate to the films because people need help. I mean, like when people make content, whether it's artistic or non-artistic, creative or non-creative, they need help. So please go to Mass of the Ages, liturgy.org, theliturgy.org, THELITURGY.org. Go to theliturgy.org and donate to Cameron's Mass of Ages, because this thing has multiple parts and you're going to be attempted to be shut down. It's coming. It happens. My book's coming out, Case for Patriarchy, in a month, and I have all kinds of attacks. But even with just, moderate low limelight, it's incredible. People don't believe it till it happens to them. Money keeps you going, and folks like your product, so they're willing to give. They just forget to a lot of times. Mass of the Ages. Do you have a Patreon account?
No. But giving at the site really helps us accomplish our goal, which, like I said earlier, this is made for the average Catholic in the pews, the faithful Catholics out there. We want to reach millions of Catholics because we want to flood traditional Latin Mass with more Catholics. We want thousands of priests to start celebrating the Latin Mass. We want this to be not just a film, but a part of the movement. And so nice. Your gifts will help us, put it into our marketing and distribution. We've reached 500,000 Catholics so far. It's amazing. And your gifts will help us reach millions. So please consider giving. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah. And people, also toward the end of Aiding Tradition, next week, classes begin at Retrograde Classical Academy. Go to timothyjgordon.com and click enroll. We got 7 exciting classes starting in the first week of September, which is next week. And go watch Mass of the Ages. If you haven't watched it, you can see it on YouTube. It's amazing. It's episode 1. I'm excited for episode 2. Cameron O'Hearn, thank you for spending so much time with me here today. And thank you for making this excellent, sublime documentary.
Thanks, Timothy. Thanks for allowing me to join your Retrograde Club. Is that what it's called? The Retrograde Club or association?
Yeah, it's a social club.
Okay, cool.
Buena Vista Retrograde Club. But
Thank you.
You're in, man. You're in, like flame. And I'll have you back on for that second time to answer that second question. I really will. Okay. Deus Volt, people. Stay strong. Keep your head on a swivel. We will see you next week. Peace.